Everyone in that restaurant thought they knew who had power that night. They were wrong. The evening began like any other quiet night in downtown Chicago. The city lights reflected across the streets, families shared conversations over dinner, and people enjoyed a few peaceful hours away from the demands of everyday life. Inside one of the city's respected restaurants, nobody expected a simple misunderstanding to become a lesson about justice, perception, and the hidden stories behind every person. At a corner table near the window sat Adrian Williams, a man who appeared to be just another customer enjoying a private evening. He was dressed simply, spoke calmly, and carried himself with quiet confidence. To anyone watching, there was nothing about him that demanded attention. He was not looking for recognition. He was not seeking special treatment. He was simply a person enjoying dinner after a long week. But appearances rarely tell the entire story. Adrian Williams had spent decades studying the law, protecting the principles of fairness, and making decisions that affected countless lives. Yet on this evening, he was not thinking about his position. He was not thinking about the authority attached to his name. He was simply Adrian, a man who believed that every person deserved respect before anyone knew their achievements. Across the room, Officer Ryan Mitchell entered the restaurant during his evening patrol. Ryan was a respected officer in his department, but he was also someone carrying the pressure that came with wearing a badge. At 34 years old, he believed strongly in order, control, and following what he considered his duty. He wanted to be seen as someone who protected the community and maintained standards. But sometimes the greatest test of responsibility came when the full story was hidden. Ryan noticed a situation that caught his attention. A misunderstanding had developed between staff members and a customer. Voices remained controlled, but the atmosphere began to change. People nearby started watching. Some looked away. Others quietly wondered what would happen next. Ryan stepped forward believing he was there to solve a problem. He did not know the man at the table. He did not know the history behind the calm expression. He did not know that the person he was speaking to represented the highest levels of the justice system. All he saw was what was visible in that moment. And that was where the real lesson began. Adrian listened carefully as Ryan approached. He did not raise his voice. He did not use his influence. He did not mention his title. For him, the moment was not about proving who he was. It was about seeing how people acted when they believed they were simply dealing with an ordinary person. Years of experience had taught Adrian something important. A person's true character was often revealed when they believed nobody important was watching. The restaurant continued moving around them. Plates were carried. Conversations continued. The city outside remained alive. But inside that room, a quiet moment was unfolding. One man carried the visible power of a badge. The other carried a lifetime of understanding what justice truly meant. Neither of them knew yet that this encounter would become a powerful reminder that respect should never depend on a person's title. Because sometimes, the person everyone overlooks is the person who understands the meaning of fairness better than anyone else. The most revealing moments in life are often the ones when people believe nobody important is watching. Inside the Chicago restaurant, Officer Ryan Mitchell continued trying to understand the situation unfolding in front of him, unaware that the quiet man standing nearby carried a lifetime of experience with the very ideas of fairness and justice that Ryan believed he was protecting. To Ryan, the situation appeared simple. He saw a disagreement that needed to be handled. He saw himself as the person responsible for restoring order. His training had taught him to pay attention, to act with confidence, and to make decisions when others looked to him for guidance. But experience had not yet taught him one of the hardest lessons about responsibility. Sometimes the most important part of being in a position of authority was not making quick decisions. It was taking the time to understand the full story. Adrian Williams remained calm throughout the interaction. He listened carefully and responded with patience. He did not challenge Ryan's position. He did not demand special treatment. He simply allowed the moment to unfold. Adrian had spent years inside courtrooms where the smallest details could change the outcome of important decisions. He understood that people often reacted based on incomplete information. He understood that first impressions could be powerful, but they were rarely complete. Throughout his career, Adrian had seen how easily assumptions could influence the way people were treated. That was why he valued patience above pride. He believed that true justice required people to look beyond what was immediately visible. Ryan noticed Adrian's calm attitude but did not fully understand it. In his experience, many people tried to explain, defend, or change situations when they felt challenged. Adrian did something different. He remained respectful because he believed dignity did not depend on winning an argument. It depended on staying true to personal values even during difficult moments. The difference between the two men became clearer with every passing minute. Ryan carried the authority of a badge. Adrian carried the wisdom of decades spent studying how authority affected people's lives. One represented the power to enforce rules. The other represented the responsibility behind those rules. Neither man raised the situation beyond what it already was. There was no dramatic confrontation. There was only a quiet moment where two very different perspectives met. Around them, restaurant guests continued watching from a distance. Some noticed the confidence of the officer. Others noticed the unusual calmness of the customer. Nobody in the room knew the complete story. Nobody knew the years of service, dedication, and responsibility carried by the man sitting at the table. Adrian still chose not to reveal his position. He understood that a title could change the way people responded. It could make someone suddenly show respect because of status rather than because of character. He wanted something more meaningful. He wanted to see how people treated each other before knowing who had influence. For Ryan, the evening was becoming an unexpected lesson. He believed he was evaluating a situation, but the situation was also revealing something about him. It was revealing how he understood power, responsibility, and fairness. The restaurant remained peaceful, but the importance of the moment continued growing. Because sometimes the greatest lessons do not come from dramatic events. They come from ordinary moments that show people who they truly are. The quietest moments often reveal the deepest truths. Inside the Chicago restaurant, the interaction between Officer Ryan Mitchell and Adrian Williams continued without anyone realizing that a simple evening would soon become a powerful lesson about perception, responsibility, and the meaning of justice. Ryan remained focused on the situation as he understood it. He believed his role was clear. He was there to maintain order, protect the environment around him, and make decisions based on the information available. Those responsibilities mattered to him because he had worked hard to earn the badge he wore. To Ryan, the badge represented commitment, service, and the trust placed in him by the community. But every symbol of authority carries a responsibility that goes beyond appearance. It requires understanding the people affected by that authority. Adrian Williams understood that better than most. Long before he became a Supreme Court justice, Adrian had dedicated his life to studying the relationship between people, laws, and fairness. He had spent years listening to arguments, reviewing complex situations, and making decisions that required patience and careful thought. His career taught him that the truth was rarely found in the first few seconds of an encounter. It was found by asking questions, considering perspectives, and recognizing the humanity behind every situation. That evening, Adrian chose silence over status. He could have introduced himself. He could have changed the entire atmosphere of the restaurant within seconds. But he decided not to. He wanted the moment to reveal something important. He wanted to understand how people acted when they believed they were speaking to someone without influence or recognition. Adrian knew that respect shown only after discovering someone's title was not the same as genuine respect. True character appeared before the introduction, before the reputation, and before the world knew someone's achievements. Ryan did not know any of this. He only knew what he saw in front of him. He did not see the years of legal service, the responsibility of a Supreme Court justice, or the countless decisions that Adrian had made throughout his career. He saw a person involved in a situation that required his attention. And that was the very thing that made the moment meaningful. The difference between them was not intelligence or intention. It was perspective. Ryan was looking at the situation from the viewpoint of someone still learning what authority truly required. Adrian was looking at it from the viewpoint of someone who had spent a lifetime understanding how authority affected others. Around them, the restaurant continued moving. Servers carried meals across the room. Guests continued their conversations. The city outside remained busy under the Chicago lights. Yet within that ordinary setting, an important lesson was unfolding. A young officer was discovering that responsibility was not only about enforcing rules. It was about understanding people. A respected judge was demonstrating that dignity did not need to announce itself. It existed through patience, restraint, and confidence. Neither man knew that the truth about Adrian's identity would eventually transform the way everyone viewed that night. For now, one man carried a badge, and the other carried a lifetime of wisdom. But soon, the world would learn which one represented the deeper meaning of justice. The most important truths are sometimes hidden in the moments when nobody realizes they are being observed. Inside the Chicago restaurant, the interaction between Officer Ryan Mitchell and Adrian Williams continued quietly, but every second was revealing something deeper about judgment, responsibility, and the way people respond when they believe they already understand a situation. Ryan remained focused on what he believed was his duty. He saw a situation that required attention, and he wanted to handle it according to his training. Over the years, he had learned that confidence and decisiveness were important qualities for someone wearing a badge. He believed that people trusted officers because they were willing to step forward when others hesitated. But there was another part of the responsibility that experience had not fully taught him yet. True leadership was not only about making decisions. It was also about understanding the people affected by those decisions. Adrian Williams watched the situation with the patience of someone who had spent decades studying human behavior and the law. As a Supreme Court justice, he had seen countless moments where people were judged before all the facts were known. He understood how quickly assumptions could shape opinions. He also understood that the most meaningful measure of fairness was how people acted before they knew someone's importance. That was why Adrian continued to keep his identity private. He was not trying to create a difficult situation. He was not trying to challenge Ryan. He simply believed that every person deserved the same level of respect, regardless of their position. The evening was becoming an unexpected lesson for both men. Ryan thought he was observing someone else's actions, but the moment was also revealing his own understanding of authority. Adrian knew that power was not proven by how many people recognized a title. It was proven by how someone treated others when recognition was absent. Around the restaurant, small details continued to shape the atmosphere. Guests quietly noticed the exchange. Employees continued their work while remaining aware of the situation. The room carried a feeling of curiosity because something about Adrian's calmness stood out. He did not behave like someone trying to win attention. He behaved like someone who understood that patience could reveal more than confrontation ever could. Ryan noticed that calmness but did not fully understand where it came from. He had encountered many different reactions throughout his career, but Adrian's approach was different. There was no attempt to control the conversation. There was only a quiet confidence that came from knowing the truth did not need to be forced. The difference between the two men became clearer. Ryan carried visible authority through his uniform. Adrian carried invisible authority through his knowledge, experience, and character. One represented the ability to enforce rules. The other represented the reason those rules existed in the first place. Neither man knew that the restaurant's security footage and witness accounts would later become important pieces of the story. For now, the evening continued as an ordinary night in Chicago. But history is often created through ordinary moments that reveal extraordinary lessons. Sometimes the person with the least visible power is the one who understands power the most. And sometimes the person who believes they are judging a situation is actually being given a chance to learn from it. The moments that define people are not always the moments they expect to remember. Inside the Chicago restaurant, the evening continued with a quiet tension that few people fully understood. Officer Ryan Mitchell believed he was handling a situation that required his attention, but he did not realize that the same moment was revealing important truths about leadership, fairness, and the responsibility that comes with authority. Ryan had always believed that being a good officer meant being prepared to act. He valued discipline, confidence, and the ability to respond when others needed help. Those qualities had helped him build his career, and he took pride in wearing the uniform. But there was one lesson that experience had not completely taught him yet. The strongest form of authority was not shown by how quickly someone could make a decision. It was shown by how carefully someone could understand before making one. Adrian Williams remained composed as the situation continued. He had spent his entire professional life surrounded by moments where patience mattered. As a Supreme Court justice, he understood that every decision carried weight. A single assumption could influence the way people viewed a person. A single moment of misunderstanding could create consequences far beyond the original event. That was why Adrian valued listening. He believed that justice began with the willingness to see people as more than the circumstances surrounding them. Throughout his career, Adrian had watched many individuals enter courtrooms carrying stories that others never knew. Some were judged by appearances. Some were judged by incomplete information. His role was to look deeper, to consider the facts, and to remember the humanity behind every case. That same principle guided him that evening. He did not need to announce his position. He did not need to remind anyone of his accomplishments. His identity was not something that needed to create respect. Respect should already exist. As the conversation continued, Ryan started noticing that Adrian's calmness was unusual. The man in front of him did not react with anger or frustration. Instead, he remained patient and allowed the process to continue. Ryan had expected the situation to become more difficult, but Adrian's response created a different kind of challenge. It forced Ryan to consider something he had not expected. What if the person he thought he understood was someone completely different? Around the restaurant, people quietly observed. Some guests began to realize that there was more to the situation than they first believed. The staff members involved in the misunderstanding started paying closer attention. Small details that seemed insignificant at the beginning were becoming more meaningful. The security cameras continued recording from above, capturing the entire interaction without opinions or assumptions. At that moment, nobody knew how important those recordings would become. They simply existed as part of the restaurant's normal security system. But truth often depends on the details people overlook. As the night continued, the difference between Ryan and Adrian became clearer. One man carried a badge that represented official authority. The other carried decades of experience understanding what authority was supposed to protect. Ryan was focused on the situation in front of him. Adrian was focused on the lesson behind it. Neither man knew that. Before sunrise, the entire meaning of that evening would change. The person who appeared to have the least power in the room was about to reveal that true influence does not always announce itself. Sometimes it simply waits for the truth to be discovered. The truth about a person is often hidden until the right moment reveals it. Inside the Chicago restaurant, the evening continued to unfold, while everyone involved remained unaware of how significant the encounter would become. Officer Ryan Mitchell still believed he was managing a difficult situation, but he did not realize that the situation itself was becoming a reflection of how people understood power, fairness, and responsibility. Ryan had spent years working toward becoming the kind of officer he believed the community needed. He respected the role he carried and believed that a badge represented trust. To him, wearing the uniform meant being ready to step forward, make decisions, and maintain order. But as the night continued, he was beginning to face a lesson that could not be learned from a training manual. Authority was not only about having the ability to act. It was about having the wisdom to understand when and how to act. Adrian Williams remained calm because he understood something that Ryan had not yet fully experienced. Every person carried a story that could not be discovered simply by looking at them. During his years as a Supreme Court justice, Adrian had witnessed countless situations where appearances created assumptions. He had seen people judged before their voices were heard. He had seen the importance of patience when the facts were not immediately clear. Those experiences shaped the way he handled every interaction, including this one. Adrian knew that revealing his identity would immediately change the atmosphere. People would react differently once they knew his position. They might become more careful with their words. They might show respect because of his title rather than because of his humanity. But Adrian believed the most meaningful kind of respect was the kind given before recognition. That was why he continued to remain quiet about who he was. He was not hiding out of fear. He was observing. He was allowing the moment to reveal something important about the people involved. Ryan continued looking at the situation through the information available to him. He did not know the history behind Adrian's calm expression. He did not know the decades of legal experience standing in front of him. He only knew the role he believed he needed to fulfill. Yet something about Adrian's behavior stayed in his mind. The man was not reacting the way Ryan expected. There was no attempt to use influence. There was no demand for special treatment. There was only patience and confidence. Around them, the restaurant slowly began to sense that something unusual was happening. The employees who had witnessed the interaction started paying closer attention. Guests quietly watched from their tables. The security cameras continued recording every detail of the evening, preserving the moment exactly as it happened. Nobody knew that those recordings would later become essential in understanding the full story. At that time, they were simply cameras mounted above the room. But truth often depends on the details captured when nobody realizes their importance. As the night moved forward, Ryan and Adrian represented two completely different understandings of authority. Ryan carried a visible symbol of power. Adrian carried the experience of someone who had spent a lifetime studying how power should be used. One man was learning, the other was watching. And before the sun rose over Chicago, the hidden truth behind that ordinary evening would change everything. The moments that reveal the truth about people are often the moments when they believe nothing important is happening. Inside the Chicago restaurant, the evening continued quietly, but the meaning behind the encounter between Officer Ryan Mitchell and Adrian Williams was becoming clearer with every passing minute. Ryan still believed he was handling a situation that required his attention, but he was beginning to recognize that every decision made by someone with authority carried a deeper responsibility. The badge on his uniform gave him the ability to act, but it also carried the responsibility to understand. Adrian Williams watched the situation with the patience of someone who had spent a lifetime learning how people respond under pressure. As a Supreme Court justice, he had witnessed moments where the first impression was completely different from the final truth. He had seen people judged by appearances, circumstances, and assumptions before anyone took the time to understand their full story. That experience shaped the way he approached the world. He believed that fairness was not something people earned after proving their importance. Fairness was something every person deserved from the beginning. Ryan continued trying to understand why Adrian remained so calm. He had expected a reaction that would make the situation easier to define. Instead, he found himself facing someone who refused to fit into the assumptions he had formed. Adrian was not trying to challenge him. He was not trying to create embarrassment. He was simply allowing the moment to exist as it was. That choice carried a meaning Ryan did not yet understand. Adrian knew that revealing his identity would instantly change everything. The conversation would become different. People would become more careful. The focus would shift from how he was treated to who he was. But Adrian believed that a person's value should never depend on discovering their title. The way someone treats an unknown person often reveals more than the way they treat someone they recognize. Around the restaurant, the story was slowly changing. Employees who had seen the interaction began exchanging quiet observations. Guests who had noticed the situation started paying closer attention. What first appeared to be a simple disagreement was becoming something more complex. The security cameras continued recording from above, capturing every detail without emotion or interpretation. They recorded the expressions, the words, and the choices made by everyone involved. At that moment, nobody realized the importance of the footage. It was simply part of the restaurant's security system. But sometimes the smallest details become the strongest evidence of the truth. Ryan looked at Adrian and saw a customer in a difficult situation. He did not see the years of service, the legal experience, and the responsibility carried by the man standing in front of him. Adrian looked at Ryan and saw a young officer still learning what true authority required. He saw someone who had the opportunity to understand a lesson that went beyond one evening. The difference between them was not about intelligence or ability. It was about perspective. One man was learning that power was not measured by control. The other already understood that justice was measured by fairness. The restaurant remained filled with ordinary sounds. Conversations continued. Plates moved across tables. The city lights continued shining outside. Yet within that ordinary evening, a powerful truth was taking shape. Before the night ended, the world would discover that the person who seemed to have the least visible influence was actually someone whose entire life had been dedicated to protecting the meaning of justice. The truth does not always appear in the moment when something happens. Sometimes it takes time, reflection, and the right evidence for people to understand what was truly taking place. Inside the Chicago restaurant, the evening was moving toward a turning point that nobody expected. Officer Ryan Mitchell still believed he was managing a difficult situation, but the events around him were beginning to reveal a much larger lesson about responsibility, fairness, and the meaning of authority. Ryan had always viewed his badge as a symbol of service. He believed it represented his commitment to protecting people and maintaining order. He had worked hard to earn the trust that came with wearing the uniform. But this night was showing him that authority was not only about having the ability to make decisions. It was about understanding the impact those decisions had on others. Adrian Williams remained calm because he understood something that came from decades of experience. He knew that moments like this often revealed more than people expected. They revealed patience. They revealed judgment. They revealed whether someone truly understood the responsibility that came with power. As a Supreme Court Justice, Adrian had spent years examining difficult situations where facts mattered more than assumptions. He had learned that every person deserved to be heard before conclusions were reached. That principle guided him not only inside the courtroom, but also in everyday life. Adrian continued choosing not to reveal his identity. He understood that the moment people discovered who he was, their behavior might change instantly. The conversation would no longer be about how a person was treated. It would become about the importance of the person's title. Adrian believed that missed opportunity was exactly why moments like this mattered. Respect should not appear only after someone's achievements become known. It should exist before the introduction, before the recognition, and before the world understands someone's position. Meanwhile, the restaurant staff and guests began to notice more details about the situation. What first appeared to be a simple misunderstanding started to feel different. People noticed Adrian's calm approach. They noticed that he was not trying to use influence or create attention. They noticed that Ryan was facing a situation that was more complicated than it first appeared. Above them, security cameras continued recording every moment. The footage captured the entire interaction without opinions or emotions. It showed the words spoken, the choices made, and the way each person responded. At the time, nobody understood how valuable that recording would become. It was simply a normal security system doing its job. But truth often depends on the moments that are preserved when people do not realize they matter. As the night continued, the difference between Ryan and Adrian became impossible to ignore. Ryan had visible authority through his uniform. Adrian had invisible authority through his knowledge, experience, and dedication to justice. One man represented the power to enforce rules. The other represented the responsibility behind those rules. Neither man knew that the next few hours would completely change how the evening was understood. Before sunrise, the restaurant would no longer remember this as a simple disagreement. It would become a reminder that appearances can be misleading, that titles do not define human worth, and that true justice begins with the way people treat others when they believe nobody important is watching. Before the first light of morning reached the streets of Chicago, the truth behind the evening at the restaurant had already begun to change the way people understood what happened. What started as a quiet interaction between Officer Ryan Mitchell and Adrian Williams became a powerful reminder that every person carries a story beyond what others can see. Ryan returned to the situation with a different perspective. The events of the night forced him to think about the meaning of responsibility and the purpose behind the badge he wore. He had always believed that being an officer meant being prepared to make decisions and protect the community. But he learned that true service required something more. It required humility, patience, and the willingness to understand before making assumptions. Adrian Williams continued his work with the same dedication that had guided him throughout his entire career. As a Supreme Court justice, he had spent decades protecting the principles of fairness and equal treatment. Yet the lesson from that evening was not about his position. It was about something much simpler. Every person deserved dignity, even when nobody knew their name, their achievements, or their influence. The security footage from the restaurant provided a complete record of the encounter. It showed the details that many people had missed in the moment. It showed a calm conversation, different perspectives, and the importance of looking beyond appearances. The recording did not need to create a story. It simply revealed one that was already there. As the details became known, people began to understand that the most important part of the evening was not discovering Adrian's title. The most important part was recognizing a deeper truth about how people treat one another. A person should not receive respect because of a position. Respect should exist because every person has value. The story also became a lesson for Ryan. The badge he wore gave him authority, but it did not define his character. His choices did. The experience reminded him that every interaction was an opportunity to represent the values he believed in. Justice was not only something discussed in courtrooms. It was something demonstrated in everyday moments. Adrian never viewed the evening as a chance to seek revenge or create embarrassment. He saw it as another reminder of why fairness mattered. He understood that meaningful change came from reflection, accountability, and learning. The most powerful lessons were often the ones that encouraged people to become better rather than simply proving someone wrong. The restaurant eventually returned to normal. Guests came and went. Conversations filled the room again. The city continued moving forward as it always did. But the memory of that evening remained with everyone who witnessed it. It became a reminder that appearances could never tell the complete story. It became a reminder that authority without understanding could lose its purpose. And it became a reminder that true power was never about making others feel small. True power was about using responsibility to protect dignity. Ryan entered the restaurant believing he understood what authority meant. He left with a deeper understanding of what justice required. Adrian entered the restaurant as a private citizen. He left having shown a lesson that reached far beyond any courtroom. Because in the end, the strongest symbol of justice was never a title or a badge. It was the choice to treat every person with respect, even when nobody knew who was watching.